All right, it's time to leave the legislative and get to the executive.
Article 2, Section 1. The executive power shall be vested in a President of the United States of America. He shall hold his office during the term of 4 years and, together with the Vice President chosen for the same term. This was one of the weirdly controversial aspects of the Constitution. This is another one that they spent a very long time hammering out what the executive was going to look like. There were a few people who basically wanted an elected king, lifelong appointment. There were some people who wanted a council of 3, which I can see an argument for. There were some people who wanted 6-year terms. There were some people who, wanted 2-year terms. There were some people who didn't want the president elected, wanted them appointed by Congress, which, in a sense, is what we have. There were a lot of arguments about what the executive was going to look like, and it all stemmed from fear of tyranny.
Yeah. So they chose, but they chose a term longer than the representatives, but shorter than the Senate.
Yeah, and that was another one of those. After a great deal of arguing, this is the compromise they came to. And the vice president is kind of an afterthought in the Constitution, which many historical vice presidents would agree with. Very, very famously, John Nance Garner, who was Franklin Roosevelt's first vice president, I think he went through like 3 or 4 of them, the cleaned up version of what he said about the vice presidency was that it wasn't worth a pitcher of warm spit.
If only he was the fourth. Yeah, if only he was the 4th vice president, then he might be different.
Yeah, the only one of FDR's vice presidents that most people know about is Harry Truman, because he happened to be there when FDR died. There are vice presidents who didn't become president who history remembers. Aaron Burr was vice president, but by and large, the vice presidents are one forgotten person after another, with occasionally one who went on to be president.
Yeah, I only remember the vice presidents of the past 40 years that I've been alive.
Yeah. I remember reliably, I think Adlai Stevenson was Harry Truman's vice president, but I'm not 100% sure. And then Nixon was Eisenhower's. And of course, LBJ was Kennedy's. And at first, LBJ didn't have one. I think, gosh, no, I don't remember who LBJ's vice president was. And then Nixon first had Spiro Agnew, who was forced to resign over tax issues in Maryland, and then was Gerald Ford.
Yeah.
Gerald Ford had Nelson Rockefeller. Jimmy Carter had Walter Mondale.
Oh.
Yep.
Mondale, I remember. I remember that was one of the president 84 election, right?
Yes, the first discussion I remember having that was about politics with someone outside my family was the 1984 election, and my then best friend and I, both of our parents, well, all of our parents, her mom and dad and my mom, were all going to vote for Mondale. Much good it did them. And then, Bush the Elder, then Dan Quayle, who was a choice, and then Al Gore, Dick Cheney, Joe Biden, of course. um, Mike Pence, and of course Kamala Harris. Yes. And now it'll be J.D. Vance, who was definitely a choice that was made.
Yep.
But even I can't reliably remember a lot of the vice presidents from before then because they don't matter.
You already mentioned the first four: Adams, Jefferson, and Burr.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right.
And the vice president mostly seems to have been the idea that the president can't do all the work, so he needs an assistant.
Yeah.
And of course, a tiebreaker in Congress.
We'll get to that. Yeah, we'll get to that in a bit. So
yeah.
So they kind of agreed on two, but one has more power.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Now, what does that mean by executive power?
So the executive branch is carrying out the laws. The legislative branch, their purpose is to set laws. The executive branch carries them out. And we're going to see how that is specifically defined as we go forward. But branches of the government that are under the executive include the military, the Department of Justice, the cabinet is all executive branch. And they are the people responsible for the day-to-day running of the government after the laws have been set. My fellow neurodivergent people are very aware of the term executive function, for example, because that is a thing that most of us are missing. And that's the part of your brain that makes you accomplish things.
What was that movie?
Which movie?
They had the neurodivergence.
I don't know. There are a bunch of movies about neurodivergent people.
Okay. I remember this movie I watched once where this one girl was neurodivergent, and they had this a community in the city, and they had to take jobs about.
I don't know. It's not familiar.
Right. I don't know. It starred that girl that was in that teenage pregnancy movie. It was serious. I mean, I don't know. I'll remember it later, probably.
Yeah, I was gonna say I wrote about after school specials last night, so there have been a lot of things about teenage pregnancy. The sheer number of after school specials that were about drugs or drunk driving or teenage pregnancy is kind of overwhelming.
Yeah, it was a WB or CW series. I think it's called Life of the American Teenager.
Oh yeah, I didn't ever watch that.
All right. Anything more to say about this particular?
Nope.
All right.